Welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tiger podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorash. I'm here with Free Press beat writer Evan Petzold. This is a special trade deadline edition. Evan just got back off the road. We're probably the last pod to record, but I think we have some of the best information. Ev, how you feeling? You've been driving for 5 hours. You got a flat tire. Tell me everything.
Well, the last time everybody heard from me, I was sitting in the Miami airport, and it was on a Sunday, and I was expecting to go from Miami to Atlanta to Detroit. Now, that Miami flight got delayed, and I was not able to make the flight from Atlanta to Detroit. And I was told, hey, look, when you get off the plane, there's going to be like an agent there. They'll get you all situated. I walked off the plane, and it was a zoo in there. I mean, there was no agent to be seen. There were bodies everywhere. And I kind of felt like, what am I going to do now? And I had to change my flight. I did that on the app, and I just walked to my gate. And, I have these like little beanie hats that I sometimes wear. Sometimes I wear them to bed just because when I used to have long hair, my hair would fall on my face. I wear a beanie, it keeps the hair out of my face, right? Like you just throw on a hat, kind of like the same thing as a headband, right? I use those two sometimes. So I ended up just like sleeping in the airport, and I cuddled up in a ball on the floor next to the gate that I was supposed to leave out of the next morning, so Monday morning. And I used the little beanie hat as my pillow, and it was the most uncomfortable night of my life. But I made it back to Michigan and then enjoyed the off day as best I could, and then had to drive from Detroit to Pittsburgh. And the way back, which is, happened on, Wednesday night, we're recording right now at 2:30 a.m. on Thursday. Driving back, and on the Ohio Turnpike, I blow a flat. It was the back driver's side, tire that popped. And thankfully enough, there was a highway, patrol officer who pulled up behind me and checked on me, asked if I was doing okay, kept his lights on, had to change the tire and put a smaller one, the small tire that they have in the back. Had to throw that on there and basically had to just drive 50 for, it was, I don't know, some 80 miles or so to get back. And I ended up just dropping the car at the Detroit airport. I was supposed to take it to, the Avis in Royal Oak, took it to the Avis in Detroit. My amazing fiance, soon-to-be wife, Savannah, came down there and picked me up. And now here we are recording. So, and then there was a trade deadline too, let's not forget. It's kind of been a crazy, Sunday through Thursday. Yeah, it's been nuts, but we're here and we got some good information and we're ready to bring it.
So let's talk about what went on. You want to talk about the big stuff, or you want to talk about the little stuff, get it out of the way, and then devote the rest of the time to the big stuff?
No, I think we just got to go big right off the bat, Mark. And I think the best place to start is probably with like what actually happened and maybe work backwards from there, just to kind of help people understand like what went on, what mistakes were made, and also what choices were made too. I think that's also really important. And obviously the big piece of news was the Tigers had two starting pitchers to trade, Michael Lorenzen and Eduardo Rodriguez. They were successful in trading Michael Lorenzen, and they could not get Eduardo Rodriguez over the finish line. So I guess the best way to start is just by kind of taking you right to the moment when everything happened. It was in the final hour of the trade deadline. Eduardo Rodriguez to the Los Angeles Dodgers was happening. It was happening. It was going down. There were no doubt about it from the Tigers, no doubt about it from the Dodgers. They both felt very confident that deal was going to go through. Dodgers were prepared to send a few prospects to the Tigers in return. Both teams worked really hard to meet certain contractual demands that Eduardo Rodriguez had, throughout that process because of a no trade clause. And Eduardo Rodriguez has a 10-team no trade clause as part of his contract. He also has that opt-out, that we've talked about, over and over and over on this podcast for after the 2023 season. So yeah, worked into that deal. There are two clauses. One is an opt-out. The other one is a 10-team no trade. And the Dodgers were one of the teams on the no trade list. And the Tigers traded Eduardo Rodriguez to the Dodgers, and Erod's agent got involved, and there were negotiations between Rodriguez and the Dodgers. And essentially it got to a point where Rodriguez said, nope, I'm not comfortable with that deal. I'm staying in Detroit. And the Tigers had nothing. And they ended up keeping Eduardo Rodriguez. And again, I mean, I think it's important that at some point we talk about what this means for the organization moving forward, just in terms of the impact of this, the fallout. I mean, that's a few prospects from the Dodgers that the Tigers were looking to get in return. And they were going to be pretty good prospects. We don't know exactly the names of them, but the fact is, Tigers kept that asking price high. It seems like, again, Eduardo Rodriguez had contractual demands, and both teams were working to meet them, which tells me that, the opt-out situation was involved in those negotiations. There were financial, pieces that were involved in that negotiation. I mean, sometimes, teams can pay a player to waive a no trade. To waive an opt-out or to waive a no trade. Like, we don't know exactly what happened. If I had to take a stab at it, I would guess, and this is more of just like, me kind of reading the tea leaves and trying to put everything together, is that in some way, shape, or form, the Dodgers wanted Eduardo Rodriguez to basically say, yep, I'm going to opt in. And then through that, they were going to pay him more money. But it seems like through those negotiations, Eduardo Rodriguez was not satisfied with what they were going to pay him. There was a lot of talk about family stuff, which I think had some involvement in it. There were also some stuff out there about Erod not wanting to go to the West Coast. He said that wasn't the case. But he did mention his family a couple of times and how much he really enjoyed Detroit. So no one's really given an exact straight answer of what the reason was. Eduardo didn't want to talk about it. He said that's between me and the Dodgers. But it sure seems like it had to do with finances and also, with that opt-out and trying to get him to stick in Los Angeles. Because it sounded like the Tigers were going to get a return like he was a player with 3 years left on his contract as opposed to just a 2-month rental. That was what they were going for the whole time. That's how they valued him. And that's what they were trying to get back. And it seemed like the Dodgers were ready to meet that if they could work out a deal individually with Eduardo in that way. And it didn't happen.
Okay.
It was a gut punch.
So before we get to my spin on all this, what's your thoughts about all this, how it was handled by the Tigers? And I think what you're sharing with me is, look, first of all, well, let's get to the Erod part just as a precursor to discussing the nature of how the transaction was handled. What a debacle it is.
I think that's important. Yeah, to go Erod first and just
Let's talk about it. And you and I have talked about it many times, and I think we're on the same page about it. Look, Eduardo Rodriguez has been playing baseball since he's 7 years old. He's evolved his career into being one of the best pitchers in the world. Now, you may laugh when I say that, but he is got an earned run average under 3. He's one of the best left-handed pitchers in the world. And he's, for sure one of the best 20 left-handed pitchers in the world. That's for sure. And he's worked his whole life to get to this point. When he signed with the Tigers, he had certain stipulations put into the contract. There were trade-offs that he probably gave up to get them. But at the same time, he also was great enough to have the leverage to earn some contractual circumstances that gave him leverage over where he could play and what he could use that leverage for, whether it was more money or location or environment. And he earned every single bit of it. So the idea that he exercised that and people want to be mad at him about it is just ridiculous. Because if you would have done it, or I would have done it, or we would have earned it, he earned all those rights. And you can agree or disagree with it, but you can't be mad at him. He's obviously, his family's important to him. He's just overcome some issues with it. And he has every right to try to preserve his lifestyle and the way he wants to live and where he wants to live. That's A. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Eduardo Rodriguez's agent, Gene Motto, put out a statement on Wednesday night that basically said, I'm going to read you a part of it, just the end of it. He said, quote, "As for the Dodgers in particular, once I was granted permission to speak with them regarding the trade, we did our best to come up with a way to make it happen where everyone was comfortable with the outcome. Unfortunately, we just ran out of time," end quote. Now, the agent doesn't get involved to work out, hey, can you link up with the Tigers? Like, no, that the Tigers linked up with the Dodgers, and then the agent had to get involved to negotiate something else, which again, you want to read the tea leaves, that's financial, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's how much money is my client going to get? And then it's making a decision where you got to ask Eduardo and you got to talk to the agent. It's like, hey, if we stay and if we opt out and go back to free agency, are we going to be able to get a better deal than whatever the Dodgers might be offering us? Because like I said, both teams were working hard to meet the contractual demands of Erod. And so that's what it ends up coming down to. And it got to a point where it seems like, and Eduardo hasn't said this, and Scott Harris hasn't said this, and Gene Motto hasn't said this, but it seems like it got to a point where the Dodgers had an offer on the table, and Eduardo Rodriguez felt like he could do better, either renegotiating his deal with the Tigers or going back into free agency. It sounded like he felt like he could bet on himself and do better than whatever the Dodgers had to offer. That's how it seems.
That's what it seems like to me.
And you can't blame him for that, can you? You can't blame him for that. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
He gets to choose.
And it's his choice.
It's all, I think that he was not eager to move to the West Coast, which is hard to believe because I'd be eager to move to the West Coast and play for the LA Dodgers. But at the same time, he wanted Do-Re-Mi to go play for the Dodgers and to renegotiate his contract. And obviously what he was hearing back or the circumstances or terms that were offered made the deal not worth it to him to do that. He is happy here, and it was not enough incentive to leave. And that is his prerogative to make that decision. He's probably leaving money on the table to do that on top of it. So, as we said
before, he's also taking a risk himself, Mark. He's also taking a risk. What if he blows out his arm in the next 2 months?
It's entirely possible. He's already had a finger injury this year. He's had other minor injuries in his career. But at the same time, it's his prerogative. He negotiated it. And he's performed to the point in his career that has allowed him to have that leverage. So
now here's where I have the issue: is it's the Tigers from the beginning of all this, and that's where I think. I mean, there's no blame on Eduardo Rodriguez here. The Tigers made a mistake, though, and they made a mistake at this year's trade deadline. They placed a high asking price on the return package for Rodriguez from the very beginning of the trade negotiations. The asking price, because it was so high, it limited interest across the league to large market postseason contenders that needed a starting pitcher and were willing to absorb the financial risk of his opt-out clause. We talked about this over and over again, and I just kind of alluded to it. If Eduardo Rodriguez were to get traded and he were to get injured, teams would be stuck paying that 3 years, $49 million that's left on his deal. If he goes to a different team and he pitches great, he's opting out. So teams, they're small market teams, mid-market teams, large market teams. Unless you're restructuring that deal, you have no idea if he is going to be a player that's going to be around for 3 years or a player that's going to be around for 2 months of the regular season and then whatever happens in the postseason. So teams were treating him like a 2-month rental based on his current deal. And the Tigers kept that asking price very high. And because of that, teams that might have been interested, like the Tampa Bay Rays, the Cincinnati Reds, the Baltimore Orioles, we're not touching that. They weren't going to do it. And so the Tigers essentially eliminated his market to the point where there were really at least only 2 teams, and it was the Dodgers, and it sure seems like it was the Texas Rangers before the Max Scherzer deal went through, that were even in play for Eduardo Rodriguez from the get-go. Now, it doesn't mean they weren't talking to other teams, because I know they were talking to other teams. They were talking to other teams as recently as Monday, but it was the Dodgers and the Rangers were the 2 teams that were going to be able to absorb that financial risk and give the Tigers back the prospects that they wanted. They were going to be able to meet the value that the Tigers were looking for to move Eduardo Rodriguez. And that, to me, is a problem. That, to me, is an issue, because the Tigers didn't have a backup plan, and they put all their eggs in one basket after Scherzer went to the Rangers. And that's Scott Harris. Scott Harris put all his eggs in one basket, was backed into a corner, and wasn't going to move from that high asking price, and it didn't work out. And he's left with nothing.
So I'm going to give you my opinion here a little bit at 2:46 a.m. And I've waited 2 days to really discuss this, but here's really where I'm at with the whole thing. Look, Scott Harris is really great at crafting a plan. And that's good. And, crafting a plan is important. It's often in baseball front offices what an assistant GM is got a lot of input into crafting a plan, because the GM is working on executing the plan. What's happened here is...
Or the president of baseball operations down to the GM, yeah.
Whatever. Okay. There's a boss.
Whatever the structure is, but the top guy.
There's a boss and there's an assistant to the boss. So where I think we have a failure to communicate is that the tactics employed by Scott Harris in his first trade deadline were almost, to any experienced executive in any business at a high level, pretty childish. Okay. I mean, for lack of a better word, it's okay to have a, expensive asking price, but the tactics that were employed here, he left himself with no backup plan. He did it late. He left himself no out. He had no leverage. He gave the player all the leverage, and he got left at the altar, and he seemed shocked by it. So, I mean, I'd like to get into it more, but, I think...
No, I mean, that's kind of how, look, I mean, that's what I wrote on Monday, Mark. I mean, the Tigers were looking to close a deal on Eduardo Rodriguez by Monday night, and they were talking to other teams. They were talking to small market teams, mid-market teams, and they weren't touching it. And it became Dodgers all the way, and it seemed like those two sides weren't close on an agreement. They were not close on value, it seemed like, until sometime around Monday night where suddenly it clicked. And I don't know if that was then a conversation with Gene Motto and then a conversation with Eduardo Rodriguez. And maybe he said, yeah, I mean, if they can meet my contractual demands, then sure, then I'll waive it. Did he say that? I don't know, but you'd have to think that these two teams were pretty far apart, and then suddenly they came to an agreement and had something to work with on late Monday night. And that's what the Tigers told other teams. That's what I heard. I heard that they told other teams, hey, look, we're looking to close something by Monday night, and teams basically started backing out and looking in different directions. So I don't know. I mean, that was his tactic. That was his strategy from everything that I've heard from people around the league.
Okay. Well, if I'm an experienced GM...
And then it became tunnel vision on the Dodgers.
Right, because he had nobody else. But my point is there are lots of ways to craft a deal. Lots of ways. Okay?
What would you have done?
Well, what I would have done, pure and simple, is I would have never backed myself into a time constraint. I would have had a deal, more than one deal. I would have made sure I had two deals, even if I would have had to try to mitigate some of the risk with money or some type of risk mitigation offer of money to another team,
or a prospect that you want to package with him with, and throw that at him.
I would have gone to Team B and said, "Look, I understand you have concerns. You have injury risk concerns. You have injury risk concerns relative to the fact that if Eduardo Rodriguez gets hurt during this next 60 days, he's going to opt in. You're going to be on the hook. So let's figure out a way to mitigate that risk. You're obviously going to get year 2 and 3 if he opts in. He'll be healthy. Year 1, there's a monetary risk. So let's try to figure out a way how to mitigate it. Let's try to figure out a way how to deal with it with a prospect, with some money, with some contract offset. But at least I would have had an offer on the table. And I would have had two offers then I would have had two offers on the table. One from Team B and one from the LA Dodgers on Monday night. And I would have gone to Eduardo Rodriguez's agent on Monday morning and I would have said, look, here's the deal. I have two offers on the table. I have the LA Dodgers, which are on your no trade clause list. You're going to have to talk to them. And I have one with Team B who's not on your no trade list. You got 90 minutes to make some headway with the Dodgers, or I'm trading you to Team B. And that way, the team has the leverage, not the player. Instead, all the eggs in one basket, basically self-sabotaged every secondary deal he might have been able to make, got backed into a timeline issue, obviously couldn't resolve the issues that Erod and his agent had with the Dodgers relative to contract, etc., and he ended up with nothing. So it was handled in a very inexperienced, almost immature way. And I think he'll know better next time. But the point was, it was handled poorly. Okay. And, we'll get into it next week, maybe, on what we think the first year of Scott Harris has brought to the Tigers. But in this particular case, unless they're able to almost guarantee themselves that they can keep Eduardo Rodriguez going forward, even if they have to extend him in a semi-reasonable way, this trade deadline was a disaster because all you have left to show for it is a high A prospect of no great value for Michael Lorenzen, a fair deal. I think we both had no issue with what they did with that. They didn't move any relievers. And, all in all, compared to, say, Rick Hahn in Chicago, who's likely getting fired as soon as the season ends, Rick Hahn unloaded half his team and did whatever he had to do and was very proactive about it. He had deals done a week ago. So, Lance Lynn got moved. Giolito got moved. He moved relievers. I mean, come on. Are you going to tell me that Scott Harris is a worse GM than Rick Hahn? I mean, that would be pretty disappointing. I mean, Rick Hahn's getting fired. So, that's my 2 cents about what happened this week.
I'm going to read you this, MLB.com, from Mark Feinstand. Read some of his stuff from time to time and talk to different executives. They waited on the trade deadline, moves that were made and moves that weren't made. I want to read you a little piece of that. Mark writes, multiple executives were baffled that the Tigers didn't have a plan B in place, knowing that the Dodgers were on Rodriguez's no-trade list. And then here's the quote. Quote, how does that happen? An AL executive said. How do they not have a fallback for LA? End quote.
So let me ask you a question now. New GM comes in almost a year ago. Fresh start. An absolute disaster of 7 years. An absolute disaster. Fresh guy. Supposedly a modern baseball approach. A lot of platitudes. A lot of promises. A lot of talk. All right. Now we're a year later, and here's what we got. There's 29 other GMs in baseball. Now, when they think about Scott Harris, I've told you, what's the famous Rounders quote? If you're at the table after 15 minutes, if you don't know who the mark is, you're the mark. And right now, I'm sure they're thinking Scott Harris might be the mark. You're not getting legitimate offers right off the jump to Scott Harris now. This was a disaster. Do you think this is now a destination location for free agents to have discussions? You think that maybe agents?
I don't know about that, but he blew it. But he blew it with Rodriguez. That's what it comes down to. And he didn't trade Jose Cisnero, and he didn't trade Chase and Shreve.
Right.
There were two relievers that he could have moved that he didn't want to move for some reason. I don't know why.
So outside of Detroit, let's be blunt about it. You start wondering, where am I going? What am I doing? Is this guy going to be able to lead them out of the woods? The place is a disaster. They've been getting their ass kicked for 7 straight years. The new regime might not be better than the old regime. The ownership must be a problem. They're not leading from ownership's standpoint. These, maybe people think that I am too hard on the Tigers for saying these things, but people, they're going to lose 90 games again. This is, how many years in a row has this been? All I have to say, if you don't like it, you think I'm mean, resume, baby. It's resume. Your reputation is your reputation. So we'll have a few people in the industry on over the next few months, and hopefully they'll tell us the truth. But this is a terrible look. And there's other ramifications to this. I keep telling you, one day AJ Hinch is going to go, yeah, this isn't fixable. I can't keep doing this every year. I got 2 players. I got 4 players. I got a bunch of maybes. It gets tiring. He's too good for that. He can leave and go get an unbelievable job in 15 minutes. And if you don't believe me, watch. So, this did not work out too well, Ev.
Well, look how quickly the Tigers hired him after the World Series when his suspension was up. I mean, that was immediate.
It was if you look back on the Al Avila resume, it's the only good move he made.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he found a few.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. And Mark, look, I'm missing out on a trade like this. It has ramifications. Like it does have a fallout. I mean, when you were able to give somebody what you felt like was equal value for Eduardo Rodriguez, and it doesn't work out, and you felt like you had it in the bag, and then you don't get anything, even at all. Not even a throwaway prospect from anybody. I mean, you got to remember that. The thing is Eduardo Rodriguez already received the qualifying offer. So if he opts out and leaves as a free agent, like the Tigers won't get any compensation in return. They will get literally nothing.
Right.
And so they couldn't even have a plan B lined up for anything. And they're left with nothing. And they were expecting to get 2-3 prospects from the Dodgers that were prospects that they liked, that were high up on the Dodgers' top prospect list, and were guys that could come in and could potentially be real dudes, be real bats in the offense to help you. And now you don't have those young players. That's a huge miss.
To me,
that's everything. What did Mark? What did Scott Harris say he wanted to do when he got hired?
Acquire young assets.
He wanted to acquire young players, develop them, and keep them. But he didn't acquire young ones in this E-Rod situation.
He did not execute. He did not execute the mission, dude. He had a plan. He did not execute the plan. Period. End of story. And as far as who the prospects were and what they were going to become, yeah, it's kind of important, but it's almost less important to me than the perception to the rest of baseball of what he's building here and his level of competence. He did damage to his own team build. He did. And he has to wear it now, and he has to figure out how he's going to fix it. The first way to fix it is to make sure he doesn't let E-Rod walk out the door. And for everybody that thinks it's crazy to be signing him to some 5-year contract, I understand your consternation about it. But probably by giving him some upfront money, adding a year to the deal and a 5th-year vesting year, he'll be fine with that. He just needs to be paid market. And if it costs you money in the last year of the contract, so be it. But look, left-handers age pretty damn well. And if you plan on having a team that's improving, you need somebody that can give you 140, 150 innings of quality baseball. And he's a guy who's going to be at the top of your rotation and not the bottom. He likes it here, and he's mentoring other people, But it most importantly, it makes up for a terrible, terrible, terrible execution of your strategy at the trade deadline.
Well, we do need to talk about a deal that did go through.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Michael Lorenzen to the Philadelphia Phillies for an infield prospect, Hao-Yu Lee. He's a 20-year-old infielder who's going to be going to High A West Michigan. He was the number 5 prospect in the Phillies organization, according to MLB Pipeline, and entered the Tigers organization as their number 6 prospect. He's a guy who's kind of hit everywhere at the High A level. Before coming to the Tigers, he hit .279 with 5 home runs, 30 walks, and 56 strikeouts in 297 plate appearances. That was in 64 games at the high A level. So that's a 10.2% walk rate and 18.6% strikeout rate. He plays second base, third base, shortstop in the minor leagues. Probably is going to be a second baseman or a third baseman. Signed out of Taiwan back in June 2021. This is the second deal now that Scott Harris has made with the Philadelphia Phillies. Remember, he went and he traded Gregory Soto and Cody Clemens to them, and you got Matt Vierling, Nick Maton, and Donnie Sands. That was back in January 2023. As far as like what to know about Lee, Harris talks about him being a type of position playing prospect that they've been after. He's hit at every level, still very young, swings at the right pitches, makes a ton of contact, drives the ball in the air. The Tigers think that his power is on the come up, and he can also play multiple positions, so they like that. Scott Harris said that the Tigers need more of those types of bats in the system. That's kind of the details on him. I do want to give the Tigers some credit and Scott Harris some credit too for what they did with Michael Lorenzen to develop him into what they developed him into. They changed his pitch mix. They dove into the analytics with him. He learned a lot about himself as a pitcher with the Tigers, and he became a lot better for it. There were some ups and there were some downs, but at the same time, there were more ups than downs, and they ended up getting a really good, prospect for him. Like, look, that's not a bad deal at all. We mentioned fair deal, and I would agree completely. It didn't blow my socks off, but at the same time, I didn't look at that and say, wow, I think they could have got more. I thought that was pretty fair. And that's, tip of the hat to Scott Harris for going out and evaluating Michael Lorenzen as an asset that he could fix and that he could work on and that he could optimize, and turning him into something and then dealing him for a young bat. That's exactly what he needed to do, and he did execute that plan.
My summation of that deal is from top to bottom, solid. That's how
Agreed.
I'll... Completely. So, and I would expect the Tigers to engage with Michael Lorenzen this offseason to see the parameters of what his financial expectations are, and I'm sure he'd be welcome back in open arms for something like 2 years, $20 million. And but that's a discussion for another day. All right.
Hey, one other thing on Lee, I got to get to it. It's important. I did talk to a couple people just about him and just to kind of get a feel for, hey, what do you expect? And one of the guys that responded back to me mentioned, quality play discipline, 50 grade contact, 40 grade raw power, hits the ball in the air a ton, kind of way too much for a guy without power. But I do think that, there is some benefit to him being 20. He still hasn't grown into his body yet. And he does hit the ball all over the field. Like he does hit the ball. He puts the ball in play. He makes contact. And the Tigers need as many of those guys as they can possibly get in the organization because that fits the mold of Scott Harris's offense of the future. So I think the big thing to watch with Lee is just hits the ball in the air a lot, but is he going to be able to develop into some power? And that'll be a good task for the Tigers hitting department. Can they help him tap into that as his body grows and he matures? And one other deal too, I don't want to forget about it. The Tigers did acquire Eddys Leonard, an infielder, in a trade with the Dodgers for cash considerations. That deal went through after the Eduardo Rodriguez trade fell through. Don't know if Eddys Leonard was a toss-in in that deal or anything like that, but Eddys Leonard was designated for assignment, which means he was removed from the Dodgers 40-man roster on Friday, 4 days before Tuesday's trade deadline. He was the everyday shortstop in AA Tulsa, and the Tigers sent him immediately to AAA Toledo. So he was a guy that was going to have to go through waivers anyway. The Tigers paid some cash to make sure that they were going to be able to get him, as opposed to having him go all the way through waivers and then have a chance to put a claim in on him. So just another name to mention because that deal did happen.
In the famous words of my long ago once prospect evaluating son Jordan, JSG, just some guy. Nice guy. Dodgers had a jettison 3 guys from their 40. I did a little homework. He was one of them. There were 2 others. Just making room. I don't think there was huge demand for them. Scott's collected a lot of guys like this throughout the year. I think he would probably tell you more org player than prospect, but you never know.
Definitely.
Tigers got a lot of utility guys, more than they know what to do with. Their best one is still in the minor leagues rehabbing, and I'm sure he's going to come back to the team after September 1st. It's Ryan Kreidler. Don't forget about Ryan Kreidler when you're talking about Zach McKinstry and Andy Ibanez and Zach Short.
Nick
Maton. Probably the best one out of all of them is Ryan Kreidler. All right, it's really late. I'm going to send you back to Savannah. I know you got a day off tomorrow, and God knows you need it, okay? In summation, the trade deadline, frustrating, disheartening, lack of execution. And I would have liked to have seen a little more accountability from Scott Harris. I thought it was a little disappointing in how forthright he was when he discussed it. So I understand he feels let down by Erod, but, I think he needs to look in the mirror a little more than think that a player let him down after he had a deal. Because
all the eggs were in one basket with no plan B.
Yeah, that's correct. So, all right. I want everybody to comment, rate, and subscribe, even though it's now 3:07 in the morning. I want to thank our executive producers, Kirk Crawford and Ann Jeanette Delgado, our producer, Robin Chan, my grandson, Braden Michael Gorash, who's fast asleep right now. My partner, Evan Petzold, for staying up this late. I am glad we got to do it today, because if we'd have done it yesterday, I'd have been using a lot of profanity. Kirk would have been mad at me, and I would have said a bunch of things I regretted. So, for my partner Evan, for my partner Evan Petzold, we'll be back on Sunday night, and we'll talk a little bit more Tigers. And peace.